Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a fascinating Bombay High Court ruling on Hanafi succession law. It's about a concept that seems simple on the surface, but actually gets incredibly tricky. Basically, who gets the surplus of an estate when the math doesn't quite add up to a whole? We're going to look really closely at the 2010 case of Bilkis, Zakiuddin, Bandukwala versus Shehnaz, Shabbir, Bandukwala. As you'll see, this case perfectly illustrates the profound tension between fixed religious law and modern legal interpretations of equity. All right, here is our roadmap. We'll start with the facts and the core legal issue, look at the specific rules of Hanafi succession, examine the bottle of blood versus marriage, and finally reveal the court's ultimate judgment. Let's get into it. Part 1. The facts of the case. We're looking at a major family dispute over the residue of an estate. So here's what happened. A Sunni Muslim man named Shabbir Bandukwala passed away intestate, meaning he died without a will. He left behind only two primary legal heirs, his widow, Shehnaz, and his mother, Bilkis. There were no children, no father, and no other residuary heirs in the picture at all. Now, under fixed Quranic shares of succession, a widow without children is entitled to 1/4 of the estate. The mother, in the absence of children or multiple siblings, is entitled to 1/3. If we find a common denominator, 1/4 is 3/12 and 1/3 is 4/12. Add those up and you get 7/12. This leaves us with a mathematically glaring surplus of exactly 5/12 of the estate sitting totally unclaimed. You can clearly see the whole conflict mapped out right here. Look at that massive gray slice. We've got the widow's fixed share, the mother's fixed share, and then this huge 5/12 surplus taking up almost half the pie. What happens to it? Does it go to the widow? Does it go to the mother? Do they split it? This visual is the exact puzzle the courts had to solve. That brings us to part 2, the core legal issue. Who exactly gets this return? The central question the court had to answer is right here on the screen. Under the Hanafi school of Muslim law, is a surviving spouse entitled to the doctrine of Rad, which translates to the return in the presence of another sharer who happens to be a blood relative? In really simple terms, the court had to figure out if the widow's portion is strictly capped at her 1/4, or if she can legally claim a proportionate chunk of that remaining 5/12 surplus when someone like the mother is still alive. To figure that out, we need to move to part 3, the rules of Hanafi succession, specifically looking at sharers, residuaries, and a few key terms. So, the doctrine of Rad, or return. As you can read here, it's a legal mechanism dictating that if there are no residuaries, the surplus of an estate is quite literally returned back to the sharers in proportion to their shares. But, and this is a huge but, Hanafi law has a very specific caveat about exactly which sharers actually get to participate in this return. First step, we have heirs by nasab. This term refers to heirs connected to the deceased by a direct blood relationship. So in our specific case today, the mother, Bilkis, represents the nasab. On the flip side, we have heirs by sabab. These are heirs connected to the deceased by marriage or affinity. Here, that's the widow, Shehnaz. This distinction right here, nasab versus sabab, blood versus marriage, is literally the hinge that this entire ruling swings on. All right, part 4, the arguments. Let's look at this classic legal battle of blood versus marriage. We have a crystal clear clash here. The mother relied on strict classical interpretations of Mullah's principles. Her argument, the doctrine of Rad, is exclusively for blood relatives, period. She argued a spouse never gets the return of any other sharers alive, meaning she claims that entire 5/12 residue. But the widow pushed back with a much more modern angle. She argued that since she's a recognized sharer, she shouldn't just be arbitrarily shut out based on ancient texts. She wanted an equitable, proportionate split of that residue. Let's move to part 5, the court's reasoning, and how they strictly applied Sunni succession laws. So did they lean toward ancient text or modern equity? Well, the court laid out an incredibly meticulous step-by-step logic. As you can see, they noted that the doctrine of Rad is a specific mechanism designed intentionally to keep property within the bloodline. A spouse only gets the return if there are absolutely zero other heirs around. No shares, no residuaries, no distant kindred. Most importantly, the bench stated that courts simply cannot deviate from established religious personal laws just to satisfy some modern general sense of equity. The personal law has a strict scheme and it has to be followed. This table perfectly captures the court's exact legal philosophy. Look at how they viewed the blood relationship, the nasab. It's permanent, Because it's permanent, the legal right is flexible. A blood relative can take their fixed share and then also take the surplus through the return. Now contrast that sharply with the sabab, the spouse. The court viewed marriage as a relationship based on a contract. Because of that, under this specific personal law, the spouse's legal right is strictly fixed. It is limited to that initial share. Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, the final judgment, where the High Court completely sets aside the lower court's ruling. Ultimately, the Bombay High Court ruled firmly in favor of the mother, Bilkis. The strict textual interpretation of the Hanafi school won out over the widow's push for modern equity. But let's actually visualize what this means for the math of the estate. Because the widow's share was deemed fixed and limited by that marriage contract, she gets exactly 1/4, not a single penny more. The entire remaining 3/4 of the estate was pooled together into a bloodline pool and handed over to the mother. So Bilkis successfully combined her original 1/3 share with that entire 5/12 surplus using the doctrine of Rod. She walks away with 3/4 of the entire estate. This quote nails it. Under Hanafi law, a spouse cannot claim the return in the presence of a blood-related sharer. This reaffirms an absolute bright-line rule. When it comes to the surplus of an estate, the permanent bloodline absolutely prioritizes over the contractual marriage relationship.